Hello guys, we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Genjutsu Master Naruto won the hearts of Kurenai, Hinata, and Anko build harem, part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Uzumaki Naruto, Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, is standing on the same bridge that Team 7 has used as their meeting place for the past month since the activation of their cell. Naruto is the shortest of the people standing there, standing only at 4 feet 9 inches with blonde hair and bright blue eyes filled with mirth, happiness, and a hint of mischievousness. He is wearing a orange and blue jacket which is rolled up at the sleeves. His black undershirt peeks out at the top of the zipper of his orange jacket. On his back is a red swirl emblazoned between his two shoulder blades. His legs are covered in orange pants which are rolled up, a length of tape strapped to his right thigh. Above that is a kunai pouch for easy access to his throwing weapons of choice. His feet are covered in blue open-toed shoes common among ninjas. His hitai, the proof that he is a ninja, flashes in the sunlight as it stands proudly on his forehead, holding back his spiky blonde locks. Next to him stands his teacher and mentor since he graduated from the academy, Hitaki Kakashi. He is the tallest and stands at an impressive 5 feet 11 inches. He is wearing the usual Konoha shinobi attire. His hitai is wrapped around his forehead but slanted so the cloth covers his left eye. The lower half of his face is covered by a blue face mask. His silver hair and single black eye are the only distinguishable features available with his face so heavily covered. His chest is covered by his green Junin vest which has many pockets for placing various things. His blue undershirt is shown as his shoulders, and arms are covered in the blue fabric from his shirt. The only break of the blue is the same red swirl presented proudly on his left shoulder. His hands are covered in fingerless black gloves with metal handguards from his Anbu days. His pants are a dark blue which are rolled up allowing for his shins to be wrapped in tape and his feet to be covered with the common blue open-toed shoes. His leg is wrapped similarly to Naruto's with tape and his kunai pouch on his right leg. Across from them the remaining two members of Team 7 stood. First was Haruno Sakura. She is the second shortest standing on the bridge and she stands at a rather normal height of 4 feet 10. Her bright, bubblegum pink hair draws the stares of any passers-by, her green eyes almost in the shape of a star as she looks at her crush. She is wearing a red kipao dress with circular designs, which reaches down to her knees. Underneath the skirt, she wears tight, form-fitting dark green shorts. Her legs are bare which lead to her feet covered in the same open-toed shoes that Naruto and Kakashi wear. Her hitai is used as a bandana to keep her long pink hair from fraying too much. The final member is Sasuke Uchiha. He is the tallest of the genin there, standing at a 4 feet 10, only slightly taller than Sakura herself. He wears his hitai around his forehead much like Naruto, his black hair combined with his pitch black eyes making for a very dark look. He wears a blue shirt with the Uchiha clan crest, a red and white fan, on the back of his shirt. His forearms are covered in blue and white bracers. His shorts are white with blue tape around his right leg and his kunai pouch on top of that. His shins are covered in warmers just as his forearms are. His feet are covered with the same open-toed shoes that the rest of his team wears. Naruto smiled as he watched Kakashi poof away after their teamwork exercises. He turned to Sakura, still with that goofy grin on his face. Sasuke-kun, would you like to go on a date with me? Sakura asked Sasuke who was standing a few feet away. Sasuke turned around and said, no, before walking off. Naruto's eyes narrowed at Sasuke's back for turning down the beautiful Sakura-chan's invitation for a date before he turned to Sakura, and his grin returned full force. Nay, Sakura-chan would you? Naruto began only to find himself looking up from his back at the sky. Shut up Naruto baka. She said as she huffed and retracted her fist, which had planted itself onto his head, causing his fall to the ground. I will never go on a date with you, get it through your thick skull. She shouted before turning around and walking away. Naruto picked himself up out of the crater his body had made when being punched and dusted himself off. He looked back to the sky with a longing expression. Is she really never going to accept me? He thought in a depression before his normal exuberance shone forth. No way, I will beat Sasuke Thames, then she will have to acknowledge me and go on a date. He thought as he raised a fist to the air in a pump of victory. Naruto sighed and let his arm fall, an air of depression around him as he looked at the ground, something not seen for Naruto since his discovery almost a month ago when he found out about the demonic fox in his belly. How can I beat Sasuke Tem when all Kakashi-sensei teaches us is teamwork exercises? He thought, still standing on Team 7's bridge meeting place. I don't want to pester him as he said that he would teach us when he felt we were ready, but it has been almost a month and we haven't learned a thing. He lamented. Naruto had asked Kakashi for help early on, but he had informed Naruto that their teamwork needed the most work and that he would not teach any of his genin something else until he felt their teamwork was up to his satisfaction. As such, Naruto had dropped asking his sensei for help since it was obvious the man was adamant about this requirement. Suddenly, Naruto looked up. Well, guess I will just have to try and train by myself, just like always. He thought with some slight bitterness at the end. He was a happy-go-lucky guy. He could even ignore many of the bad things in his life. But he was completely tired of being alone. He had been alone since his first memory. It was of him walking along the street from the Hokage Tower back to the orphanage, and he was being glared at as he walked by. Alone, again. That was all of his memories. Even his times as a team made him feel alone, though less so as his teammates did actually interact with him. He knew they only interacted with him because they had to, though. He shook off those bad times and began to walk into the forest, heading to a clearing he had used since the formation of his team. Not a single person saw the shake of a head with spiky silver hair and a single eye shining in the darkness as Naruto's teammates left him and then Naruto left himself. Kakashi shunshined away, disappointed at his team's teamwork. Naruto walked onto Training Ground 7. He looked over at the memorial stone and wondered, not for the first time, who his parents were. He hoped they had been awesome shinobi that took down corrupt governments and rescued princes and princesses alike. He imagined his father, tall, handsome, with one wicked set of kunai standing in a ferocious pose as he looked out along the battlefield ready to risk life and limb to defeat his enemies. His mother stood beside him, her mouth spread into a fox-like grin much like his own. She had a dangerous-looking katana that seemed ready to drink the blood of her foes as she stared down her enemies. He let a smile cross his face as he thought this, though it was bittersweet as he knew that he had no idea who his parents were. He shook the bright image out of his head before extending his senses a bit as he didn't want anyone to find his new practice clearing. His previous clearing had been disturbed after his last training session there after he had graduated. As such, he searched for and found a new training clearing for his awesome new techniques that he would create and learn as a ninja. So, once he found it, he tried as best he could to keep others from finding it this time. Once he knew that no one was watching him, Naruto used the stealth techniques he had learned while running from the Anbu after his pranks to sneak away into the forest and headed off to his clearing. Naruto crept along the underbrush, keeping quiet and making nary a sound as he continued on his way. His orange clothing was not the best for his stealth, but he loved the color orange and no one would ever talk him out of wearing it. He smiled as he finally walked into his training clearing. He looked around and nodded his head as he was satisfied he hadn't been followed. He walked into the middle of the clearing and put his fingers together in a cross-like shape. With a soft cry of, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, 3 other Narutos popped into existence next to him. 2 went and sat down on opposite ends of the clearing as one clone faced off against Naruto. Each took the beginning stances of the academy style and began to lunge at each other. Instead of hitting his clone, when Naruto would make contact, Naruto would lightly tap his clone, easily stopping almost all of the force from his attacks. He had learned early on that his clones did not last for strong hits, so he had adapted his hits so he could pull his power away from them at any point he wanted. The first clone continued fighting him for close to 30 minutes before it was dispelled. When it did, his other clones did not give him a chance to rest, as one of them jumped in and continued the furious fight he had begun with the other clone. Continuing in this manner until he had beaten his 3 clones and fought for an hour and a half straight, Naruto collapsed on his back, breathing slightly labored as he lay there. "Kuso!" he screamed. A few birds leapt from the trees as they heard his scream, but many just flicked their feathers and looked down at him as if they were trying to understand why he was making such a noise. Naruto took a deep breath and let it back out while relaxing his muscles. "This is pathetic. I can't train anything other than my own taijutsu, and it doesn't even get any better because I cannot improve on it at all," he yelled in his head. "I wish the librarians would let me into the library so I could look for stuff," he thought sadly with a downcast look. Naruto sighed and picked himself up. Deciding he didn't have any other workouts he could do, he began to walk through the underbrush, heading towards a little waterfall he knew was near that he could wash the grime of his training away. The amazing thing about this waterfall was it was slightly heated. He had followed the river back to the natural hot springs that gushed from the mountains around Konoha. So, it was better for him to take a bath out here than to take a freezing cold shower in his own apartment. The water heater never seemed to be working, and Naruto could never understand why. The best part of it, though, was no one but himself knew about it. He had never seen anyone ever come to the waterfall, and he had once camped out there for 2 weeks during summer vacation. It was fun and he quite enjoyed the experience. Of course, he returned to the village every few days for some supplies, but he basically lived out in the forest. He hadn't known about his new training clearing, having never searched for it. So, he quietly crept to his heated waterfall so no one could follow him. He made it close to the edge of the brush and was pushing the last bush out of his way as he stepped forward when a woman sunshined in front of him on the banks of the small pond the waterfall emptied into. Naruto froze for a second before slowly putting his foot back down and crouching down with the bush hiding his presence as he watched the woman. Normally, he would immediately jump ahead and ask who the hell she was, but something stopped him from even revealing his presence to her. A sixth sense he had honed over the years, running from the occasional mob that would happen around his birthday, compounded with the constant glares his village gave him. This sense told him not to move nor to make a sound or horrible pain would befall him. He had always listened to the voices, it protected him from the mobs until he could defend himself. When he could defend himself, the mob stopped. So he listened and crouched down, spying on the woman he now inspected scrupulously. She was very beautiful. Even only seeing her from behind, Naruto could tell this woman just exuded a confidence and grace not found in many women, at least not in comparison to the women Naruto met. Her black hair fell from her head in an almost messy fashion, but, for all its messiness, it seemed orderly, almost as if she willed it to follow her demands. He followed the hair down to her mid-back. Underneath it he could see the wrappings of white bandages with a pattern of something that looked like rose thorns, but he couldn't see any blood stains. He concluded that the woman was using those wrappings as clothing. His assumption was proven correct as he followed her hair to the edges of it and saw that the bandages wrapped around her whole body. Below her hair, he could see the bandages, but he followed that lower to her posterior. Now, Naruto was not perverted, like many people assumed because of his sexy jutsu. He was simply looking for a way to beat people when he made that jutsu. As such, he was surprised when a bit of blood leaked from his nose when he saw how shapely her backside appeared and the way it jiggled slightly when she moved. Seriously, I don't know why some sites say he is perverted. he obviously knows nothing about and sees no problem using his sexy no jutsu on who he claims to be perverts. Not just to use on a whim. His eyes continued their downward journey to see some of the most toned legs he had ever laid witness to. He could see that this woman's legs were shaped with muscles, nothing too drastic but enough to prove that she worked out enough to keep her body fit. Even through the bandages on her thighs, he could see her muscles ripple as she shifted from foot to foot. Her calves were sculpted just as perfectly as her thighs. Her feet covered in sandals just like his own. His eyes snapped up from her feet when he saw her shift her upper body to look around. He couldn't manage to see anything about her chest or face because of his angle, so he had no idea who this was. He did notice though, that her right arm was covered in a red sleeve as her hands and forearms were wrapped in tape. He was about to leave, intent on coming back later, when he saw her relax. Curious, he stomped on the urge to leave and continued spying on the woman. He wiped his nose to remove the one blood droplet he had inflicted onto the ground next to him as he watched the woman completely relax. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw the woman reach up and untie something from under her curtain of hair. They widened further when he saw she had untied a hitai from her head. She's a ninja. Shit. Now I can't move. Wonder who she is. He thought to himself as his body froze up upon the discovery of her profession. He knew she wasn't a genin. That left her being a chunin or junin, and he couldn't help but shake the feeling this woman was a junin of the highest caliber. For some reason, when he thought of junins, her dress seemed familiar. He shook that thought as he saw her reach up and begin to unwind the bindings that were her dress. He watched transfixed, as inch by tantalizing inch, her skin became exposed to the outside world and to him. His eyes darted around quickly as she laid the clothing on a nearby rock. His eyes then locked onto her posterior as he saw she had bandages covering her, downstairs, as Naruto would call it, along with her chest. He noticed she also had a mesh shirt on that was connected to her right sleeve. She reached down and pulled her mesh shirt off along with her sleeve, leaving her back completely bare besides her bindings, and Naruto saw her muscles ripple as she did so. It was very obvious she trained extensively to keep her torso well muscled but not overly so. Naruto's heartbeat increased and his lower head started to swell slightly. Naruto was confused at this reaction. He had never experienced this before. He looked down, tearing his eyes away from the woman in front of him for a moment to see his member poking at the fabric of his boxers and creating a slight bulge down there. He shook his head and turned his attention back to the woman, deciding he could figure that out later. When he managed to look back at the woman, he saw her slowly unwrapping her chest bindings. His heartbeat seemed like a drum in the silence of the forest, but he could only see her arms as she slowly unwrapped herself. She draped the bindings on top of her dress and reached down. Naruto, guessing what was going to happen, yelled at himself to move, but his body stood, transfixed as he watched this woman start to reveal her creamy skin to the world. He watched as, wrap after wrap, uncoiled itself from her skin. When she had finished, Naruto was presented with a scene many men would die for. A shapely posterior completely bare and staring right at him as she bent over to pick up hitai. His brain was almost fried as his better than normal eyesight seemed to hone in on something he had only seen in pictures on the adult magazine rack. He saw a small slit, pink in color. It had no hair around it, just her perfect creamy skin. Her luscious thighs framing it perfectly as he felt his nose begin to almost gush blood. The thing to finally put him into blessed unconsciousness was the fact he saw her from between her legs hanging from her chest. He noticed how she had these little things on the tip of her that stuck out. He felt his member throb painfully as he took this sight in before he felt his eyes roll into the back of his head. Somehow, his body remained locked in a crouching position as Naruto fell unconscious. It was only a few minutes, but Naruto recovered from his sensory overload and returned to the land of the living to witness that same woman underneath his waterfall, completely. He stayed in his position, completely immobile as his member throbbed painfully with her back turned to him. He looked down and frowned at his body. What the hell was this? He didn't even know why he had fallen unconscious or why his nose was bleeding. He only saw that happen when the old man read that stupid perverted orange book. His eyes widened as he took that in. I am not a pervert. He yelled to himself as he fell onto his butt from pumping his hand into the air. Unfortunately, this was right when the woman turned around and heard his movement. Naruto caught a glimpse of pink circles on the woman's chest just like his own and a trimmed black bush of hair down by her pink slit before the woman covered herself and was suddenly right by her clothes as she spoke in an ice-cold tone. Come out, she said. Naruto's body moved on its own again as he suddenly leapt out of the bushes and stood in front of the woman, startling her. Naruto stared at her slightly before he felt some ki coming from her and his eyes snapped to her own. He noticed how her hands were covering her chest and downstairs before he saw her face. His eyes started at her jawline. He noticed she had a rather dainty-looking jawline, but he was sure that this woman used her looks to her advantage. Some part of him idly noted that those looks were obviously weapons. So he ignored her daintiness and looked closer, his eyes picking out the strong muscles underneath her skin. Even for her face she was trained. Her cheeks were dusted a light red with something on her skin. Her lips were a full luscious red covered in red lipstick. His eyes traveled further up and finally locked with her own. His own eyes widened as he saw ruby red eyes glaring back at him. Her eyes had 2 rings of black within them, one so small it almost seemed like a pupil, but Naruto's eyes picked out the speck of red in between them. The two stayed in that position for almost a full minute, Naruto just staring into her ruby red eyes and her glaring back at him before she spoke. What do you have to say for yourself? She asked. Naruto's ears almost flew off of his head. That voice was heavenly, almost as if listening to an angel. The musical notes seemed to draw him in and confuse him as she glared at him. He almost stuttered a response, but his sixth sense kicked in and, in one of his once in a prank genius moments, he responded. I have nothing to say, for the beauty which lies before my eyes is beyond comprehension and, as such, would be an insult to try and put in words. Naruto said, the words spilling from his mouth as if he had always been capable of speaking to women like that. Truthfully, in his own head, he was wondering where the hell those words came from. Her response would have stunned anyone who knew her. She blushed. Her cheeks went red and her hands almost moved away from her body as she took in his words, almost as if his words had triggered something within her. Her eyes glazed over a bit as she stared down at the whiskered blonde boy in front of her. Naruto, his moment of intuition having passed, immediately lowered himself onto the ground, his head between his hands as he bowed on his knees. Please don't hurt me, I didn't mean to peek on you. But I just always clean here, and I was tired, but my senses told me to stay, and then my body, and, he stuttered as he feared he did something wrong by making her blush. Gomenasai, he cried as he remained in his bow. The woman's red eyes looked down at him, and she giggled at his admission. His response to her question having evaporated her anger at him, as she now knew he was not just a pervert trying to watch her, just a confused kid who was very good with words and willing to take his punishment as he hadn't tried to run. Her red eyes suddenly widened as she took in exactly who he was. She sighed as she spoke. Uzumaki-san, please get up and turn around, she said in her same melodious voice. Naruto looked up at her with fearful eyes. She was surprised when she moved and his eyes still remained locked on hers and didn't move to her body despite his acceptance of punishment. I wish to clothe myself, Uzumaki-san, I will not hurt you, she said gently. Naruto's fearfulness abated somewhat, but he got up and turned around, making each action deliberate and keeping his eyes locked on hers before he turned around, proving to the woman he was serious about this. When he turned around, he heard her rustling with her clothes and pulling them on. He took a discreet sniff of the area. The scent of the forest filled his nose, but he could smell something sweeter in the air. It was a floral scent that he was almost certain emanated from the woman behind him. It smelled of roses and lavender. Something he was almost sure wouldn't mix but somehow managed to meld together in a mixture of scents bordering on perfection. His eyes rolled as he almost purred in delight from the smell. He took a few more sniffs before he heard her clothes stop rustling and asked, "Can I turn around now, Kunoichi-san?" He asked politely. The woman answered almost immediately, "Yes, Uzumaki-san, I believe we need to have a talk though." Naruto shivered, but he turned around to see the woman with a fiery gaze, though it didn't seem she had any intention on hurting him, just talking. Naruto walked over to a softer part of the ground and sat on the ground. He looked up at the woman and spoke. "All right, but who are you? And how did you find this place? I thought I was the only one who knew about this place," he said. His fear of the woman had him acting a bit calmer than normal. Though he knew she didn't mean him any harm physically, he shuddered as he thought of what women did to perverts, Sakura being the prime example. The woman looked down at him before moving closer to him a bit and sitting down so the two of them were facing each other. She looked him straight in the eyes. "I guess it isn't surprising you don't remember me, but you have met me before," she said. Naruto's eyes squinted before he pointed a finger at her like he was accusing her of something. "You're Hinata's dog boys, and Shino's sensei," he exclaimed, his normal exuberance showing through. The now revealed sensei of Team 8 smiled slightly. "Glad to see I made an impression," she said. "My name is Yuahi Kurenai. I know about this place because I stumbled across it a few days ago and I like to take showers away from the village. I have problems with my own shower," she said with a bit of a dark tone in her voice. Although Naruto did not know it, she was the suspect of many men trying to peek on her just as any of the prominent kunoichi were. Unfortunately, many of the men in Konoha seemed to be perverts, so it was hard to feel safe while in such a vulnerable position as bathing. Naruto nodded, surprising her. "I know." Her eyes widened. "My shower is always cold," he exclaimed as if that was her problem too. "This place is perfect for taking a shower though," he said. Kurenai chuckled slightly. "That it is, hence the reason why I am here," she said with mirth in her voice. "Though that brings me to what you were doing, Uzumaki-san," she said with complete seriousness in her voice. Naruto's eyes lowered. "What you did was wrong and," she started only for Naruto to cut her off. "I know, Kurenai-sensei, I just couldn't stop myself. You are very beautiful and I had never seen something like that. I am very sorry and I will never do it again. Please just don't tell anyone about this," he said in a pleading voice. Kurenai's blush came back as his words struck her. She cursed herself in her head as she prided herself on hiding her emotions. Luckily, Naruto was quite dense and currently trying to get out of a punishment. She looked down at him with a scrutinous eye. "Look at me, Uzumaki-san," she said. Naruto's blue eyes raised and locked with Kurenai's. "Do you admit you peeked on me?" she asked. Naruto nodded. "Do you know that it is a crime to peek on people while they are taking baths?" she asked. Naruto nodded again. "You understand that I could take you to the Hokage and have you thrown in jail for this, correct?" she asked. Again, Naruto nodded. Kurenai sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "Very well, since you obviously weren't trying to peek on me deliberately." She shot a glare at him which had him smiling sheepishly. "And you did not try to deny what you did but instead accepted your responsibility to the consequences of your actions. I will not report this to the Hokage," she said, drawing a relieved sigh from Naruto. Honestly, she never would have reported him. She would never admit it, but the fact he had managed to hide from her senses and stay hidden until she was already washing herself required some serious stealth skills. Aside from that, the fact he had seen her was not something she wanted common knowledge. So, she scared him into silence while simultaneously gaining something to blackmail him with if she ever needed to. She grinned evilly, on one condition, she said as she figured something she wanted to do for the blonde-haired boy in front of her. He had complimented her in ways no one ever had before, and she was feeling quite connected to him, as his burden must not be easy. Naruto's eyes snapped to her. What? He asked, his eyes squinting. He would normally have run away as soon as she conceded not turning him in, but his curiosity of her actions, i.e. not acting like Sakura, confused and intrigued him at the same time. You let me take you to go get some better clothes, she said as she eyed his orange monstrosity. How in the hell did I not see him with that on? She screamed in her head. What? He exclaimed, my clothes are perfect, what's wrong with them? He asked. He loved the color orange, and it was a miracle the store had these orange jumpsuits on sale when he went to buy his clothing. He loved this thing. It had many extra pockets and it was extra durable, plus he had many different Z's, all for the low price of half of anything else he tried to buy. Kurenai looked down at him with disdain. How exactly would orange help you in a fight? She asked. My clothes lead my attackers to focus on other areas before my own attacks, she explained. Your orange just sets you as a beacon, she said as if it explained everything. Naruto just mumbled something under his breath. Kurenai's eyes narrowed. What was that? She asked, her righteous fury coming into play. Naruto shrank away but repeated himself in a louder voice, it's cheaper than anything else. He said, I managed to get this for half of anything else I try to buy in any of the stores. I don't have the money to pay for new clothes, he explained. Kurenai's eyes narrowed. Damn civilians, she thought to herself. Tell you what, I will pay for it if you promise to let me use this spot, seeing as you already knew about it before me, she said. Naruto looked up at her with wide eyes. You can use this anytime you want, Kurenai-sensei. You don't have to pay for it. It's not like I own the place, he said. Kurenai smiled at him. Then just think of it as a friend helping out another, she said. Naruto's eyes squinted as he looked at her. Why would you want to be friends with me? He asked. Kurenai's smile disappeared. Why wouldn't I? She countered. Naruto looked down. He spoke quietly. You know what I contain, Kurenai-sensei. Many people within the village glare at me. I am dense and stupid, but I am not blind. I can see that many people would not like to be my friend, and the ones I have aren't too well liked, he said, his morose-sounding voice cut to Kurenai's heart as she imagined that her small group of friends was by choice, his was by necessity. Kurenai leaned forward and smiled at him. Then I will just have to join them. Because I want to be your friend, do you want to be mine? She asked. Naruto smiled brightly at her. Yes, he said with his happiness almost boiling over. Kurenai couldn't stop herself and giggled at him. She looked almost startled as she hadn't giggled in years. But she shook it off as Naruto's smile seemed to disappear before being replaced by something. His lips twitched and slowly spread as they curved upwards. Naruto's smile seemed to be reborn as it slowly spread across his face. Kurenai's lips twitched upwards as she saw his first true smile. Then we are friends, Naruto-san, she said. His happiness is infectious as always. Arigato, Kurenai-san, he said. Kurenai smiled slightly. One other thing though, Naruto-san, she said. Naruto. His head to the side as if he were confused. A demonic mask seemed to materialize behind her head as she smiled sweetly at him. Please refrain from peeking at me when I am taking a shower from now on, she said. Naruto blushed and nodded his head emphatically. Kurenai's slight smile returned. Then, since it is getting so late, I will meet you here tomorrow right after your team training, she said. Naruto nodded and smiled at her. As she turned, Naruto spoke up. Would you like me to walk you home, Kurenai-san? He asked. Kurenai turned around. a bit surprised at his offer. You don't have to, Naruto-san, she said. Inwardly, she was wondering why he would offer. It's no problem, Kurenai-san, besides a gentleman should always walk a lady home. A light pink dusted Kurenai's cheeks as his constant flattery did not fail. He may not realize what he is doing, but he is being the perfect gentleman. Especially, since we just became friends, he said with a smile to her. She smiled lightly at his gesture, as any idea of an ulterior motive was swept from her mind with his blatant honesty. If you wish to, Naruto-san, I would enjoy the company, she said politely to him. He stepped forward and fell into step with her as the two began to leave the clearing and their embarrassing moment behind themselves. Edge of the training grounds. Kurenai and Naruto approached the edge of the training grounds as darkness settled across the land. Naruto smiled up at Kurenai as they began to walk into the shinobi sector of the village. They had been walking in comfortable silence from the clearing and they were nearing Kurenai's apartment. Naruto looked up at Kurenai as they walked and decided he could ask her for something. Kurenai-san, you're a Junin, right? He asked. Kurenai looked down at him and smiled slightly. Yes, Naruto-san, she said. Do you think? He stopped feeling bad for asking his friend for something so soon. What is it, Naruto-san? She asked gently as they continued walking. Naruto took a deep breath. Do you think you could teach me a few things? He asked. Kurenai's stride faltered as she heard his question, but she recovered fast. You have Kakashi who can teach you anything I could, she said. Naruto looked down slightly. I guess that wasn't a good question, Gomen ne Kurenai-san, he said as he smiled at her and they approached her own apartment. Kurenai was about to say something when she saw they were at her apartment building. Here we are, she said. Naruto looked at the apartment and smiled. Well, see you tomorrow, Kurenai-san, he said. And, arigato, he said before he turned around and ran back towards the town. Kurenai stood there, looking back at him for a bit before she sighed and entered her apartment complex. Naruto ran from Kurenai's apartment, his happiness boiling over and giving him more energy. He wondered how he had managed to make friends with her, but he just brushed it off as he ran down the street, excited that he had another person he could call his friend. As he passed the main square, he slowed down and started to walk on the street. His smile could not be beat as he continued walking. He looked around at the slums of Konoha where his apartment was located. He didn't care about his apartment. It was homey and he enjoyed it. So he walked to his apartment complex and entered his house. Because he had forgotten to take a shower, he stripped down and jumped into his cold shower, smiling all the while. After he finished, he dried himself off with an old tattered towel and headed to his bed. As he lay in his bed, with his froggy headcap and orange pants, he began to think back and smiled as he came across his first new friend since his school days. During the school year, Iruka-sensei had helped him near the end of the year, but that was it. He had his team, but they weren't friends so much as acquaintances. He counted Iruka as a close acquaintance, but since he had waited so long to help him, after letting Mizuki sabotage him for 5 months, Iruka had quickly lost friendship status. Finally, he thought about his Jiji, the Hokage. He frowned as he thought of him. He had trusted him explicitly and had followed his instructions to the letter. But all it had brought him was pain to this point. He had told him he never did anything against the villagers and that all they needed was time before they would stop trying to hurt him. He said he didn't know why the villagers were attacking him. But he knew all along. He knew why the matrons at the orphanage would not take good care of him. He knew why the mobs would amass on his birthday to find him. He knew why he was hated and he never told him. Naruto rolled over to his side and let a choked sob be ripped from his throat as he acknowledged that his Jiji lied to him. He never let his Jiji know he didn't trust him anymore, but he didn't. If he lied about something so big, what else might he be hiding from him? Might he know who his parents were? Might he have known he would have never graduated if he hadn't stolen the forbidden scroll because he had abnormal amounts of chakra. Unfortunately, because of his Gigi's actions, he no longer trusted the most stable part of his life up to this point. But, as he let the one tear fall from his eye, Naruto's frown turned into a bright smile as he thought of Kurenai. She was someone he felt he could trust even with their limited time together. She hadn't ratted him out like others would have. She actually asked for his friendship. He smiled brightly as he allowed himself to drift off into sleep. Naruto groaned as he woke to the blaring of his alarm clock. He turned over and blocked his eyes from the harsh glaring of the sun's rays as they peeked through the tattered curtains on his windows. His other hand searched for his alarm clock by feeling alone as he attempted to stop the infernal racket it was bringing. He groaned again as his hand finally found it. He brought it down in an arc, smashing his hand onto the off button and stopping the blaring of the alarm. He relaxed as he let out a sigh and rolled out of bed, allowing his body to rest on his feet as he landed on his cool floor. He scratched his head as he put his froggy headcap on his bed and walked into his bathroom. He walked in front of the mirror and blearily looked at his reflection. He shook his head and slapped his cheeks to wake himself up, with a cry of, "Yosh!" He splashed some cold water onto his face. He grabbed the same tattered towel as last night and dried his face as he grabbed his toothbrush and began to brush his teeth. Once he had finished with this, he walked back out of his bathroom and into his room. He stripped his pants off and looked into his dresser. He smiled brightly as he saw his orange jumpsuits. "Oh yeah, Kurenai-san," he exclaimed as his face brightened up and shone with happiness. Then he frowned. He would have to say goodbye to his usual clothes if he went with Kurenai. He sighed. "Well, I guess a change couldn't hurt," he said reluctantly. He slowly slipped his jumpsuit on, as if savoring the last time he would be putting it on. If Kurenai had her way, he was sure that she would be getting rid of his jumpsuit. She had made it clear she didn't like it, just like the majority of people who found out he was a ninja. He couldn't understand why everyone was so against his jumpsuit. Orange was awesome. He only had 2 pairs, but he loved them dearly as they kept him quite comfortable and hid his less than desirable body. He sighed as he remembered this. He hoped Kurenai wasn't going to leave him because he could see his bones. That was part of the reason for the jumpsuit. He couldn't get real food, so he was malnourished. Not that he understood that. He just knew that he had to skip a meal here or there because he couldn't afford it. Sometimes he would go a few days without it before he got his weekly pay from the Hokage Tower. Now the odd thing about this was, he had weapon money set aside that he had not touched since he started to put some aside each time he would get his weekly amount. He knew he would need to buy some more weapons for when he made genin, so he still had that money set aside because he refused to dip into it even when he was hungry. He had not spent it yet, as Kakashi had scared him into thinking he wouldn't make genin, and, upon seeing the horrors of D-rank missions, he didn't want to spend the money he had set aside. Which reminded him that it was today that he got paid his weekly allowance. He thought it odd. Now that he was a ninja he shouldn't get an allowance, but once he saw how little the D-rank missions paid, he was glad he still had it. Naruto smiled as he pulled on his pants and leaned under his bed. He pulled a loose floorboard up and reached into it. He withdrew his trusty Gamma-chan, which was bursting with bills from what he had saved, and frowned at the small amount he had. "Damn, only 160,000 ryu," he said as he looked at it. "I get like 10,000 ryu every week. I was hoping to save some more," he said. Note: that's about $1,600 he saved. He gets 100 a week. He sighed and simply put Gamma-chan into his inner jacket pocket and replaced his floorboard. With this done, he walked into his kitchen and began to make himself breakfast. After throwing away his rotten milk, he realized he didn't really have anything to eat other than some dry cereal. "Well, I guess I will just have to suffer through training until we get our paychecks and I get my allowance," he said with a dry chuckle as he put his cereal back into his pantry and finished getting ready. He grabbed his kunai pouch and strapped it to his leg as he walked to his doorway. He slipped his shoes on and walked out of his apartment. Naruto walked down the stairs of his apartment with a small smile on his face as he contemplated yesterday's events. I can't believe I got a friend like her. He thought to himself, she is smart, pretty, and must be pretty strong to be a sensei. I am so glad she is my friend. Plus, she doesn't glare at me for the damn fox. He stated in his head as his smile grew marginally. He reached the bottom of his stairs and set off to the bridge to wait the customary 3 hours for his eternally late sensei. As he walked, he greeted a few of the people in the red light district. He had been living here for years now and knew most of what went on down here. He knew that there were places where men, married or not, could have a good time at. There were places for people to get drunk. Personally, he wanted to try that as it seemed rather fun for some people. Though he didn't like the morning after stuff he witnessed, he was still curious about it. There were a few places down here that he didn't go to since people had warned him off of it. He generally avoided those places as it spooked him whenever he saw someplace like that. Not scared, just spooked, he assured himself. He saw that he was reaching the town square and began to get more glares as he walked further and further into the bustling center of the city. His smile seemed to be a bit forced to any who might know the blonde, but none of these people spared him a second glare as they went about their business. He tried to ignore them all, but it was hard as it happened every day. Ever since he had found out about the Kyuubi, he caught more of the glares now. For some reason, he was no longer oblivious to their blind hate. He knew why they glared now, not that it made bearing the burden any easier. He still had yet to confront his Gigi about why he had never told him about the Kyuubi himself. He supposed it didn't matter since he doubted his Gigi would answer him truthfully. It was getting harder and harder to call the old man his Gigi ever since that night. He sighed again. All this brooding wasn't like him. He put a bigger smile on his face and started to wave at the people he passed by on his way to the bridge. All he got in return were glares, but he continued anyways, just taking it all in stride as he walked. His eyes never wavered from the mirth and mischief that were reflected in them. He never saw the Anbu on the roof shunshin away after seeing his small bout of brooding. Naruto finally made it to the bridge and noticed his 2 teammates already sitting there waiting for him and their sensei. He walked up to them and greeted them. Good morning, Sakura-chan, Tem. He shouted. Sakura turned to him and screeched, shut up, Naruto baka. Stop being so loud. Naruto's eyes narrowed at her. Despite his crush, he could only take so much abuse. Not even Sasuke saw Naruto's eyes narrowing as Sasuke responded, HN. Naruto sat on the bridge and began the waiting game for his sensei. But he thought of something not even a moment later. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leaf that had somehow managed to get put in his jumpsuit. He looked at it quizzically until an idea popped into his head. I have large chakra reserves according to Kakashi-sensei. If I manage to continue trying to increase my control, won't that make my jutsu even better? He questioned himself. Upon deciding that he was right, he put the leaf on his forehead and began trying to make it stick to him. Sakura and Sasuke simply sat there. Sakura staring at Sasuke with stars in her eyes as Sasuke tried to ignore his team. Eventually, Sakura stopped staring at Sasuke long enough to notice what Naruto was doing. What are you doing? She asked as if he were stupid. Naruto's concentration was broken and his leaf fell from his forehead as he looked at Sakura. Chakra control. He said simply. Then he grabbed the leaf and began to try to place it back on his forehead. I know that, Naruto. I meant, why are you doing it? She asked. Naruto looked at her, surprised. To increase my control, Sakura-chan. He said, still oblivious as to what she was trying to say. He put the leaf back on his head and began to let it stick to him. He smiled as he released it from his hands and it stayed floating on his head. Sakura scoffed and turned away from him, watching Sasuke again with stars in her eyes as she ignored Naruto. Naruto sat there concentrating on his chakra and succeeding in keeping the leaf on him. For close to an hour, Naruto managed to suppress his normal impatience and kept his technique going. But once that time was up, he could not contain himself anymore. He began to think of ways to increase his training as he realized that, if he let his mind wander, his chakra control exercise became harder. He thought up many different things, but the easiest would be seeing if he could push the leaf back and forth across his body using only his chakra. Deciding he could try that first, he attempted to channel chakra directly below the leaf and slowly tried to turn off the chakra that was holding the leaf to him, so the leaf would float down and attach to the new place he had chakra channeling. Unfortunately, once he let go of the leaf, it flew off and landed across the bridge. He sighed as he stood up and walked over to the leaf. He grabbed it and walked back to his original position before sitting back down and staring at the leaf, trying to figure out how to do this. He turned the leaf over and looked at the back of the leaf as if that would solve some great clue. Finally, a proverbial light bulb appeared over his head. When he first started this technique a few years ago, he would always push the leaf away with extra chakra because he had so much. If he could provide the push with excess chakra, timing it just right so the leaf would be pushed in the direction he wanted, then he could attach it to other places on his body. So, he slowly put the leaf back onto his head. He channeled chakra to a spot just below the area and tried to increase the chakra running to the leaf but not to the other area. The leaf blew off of his forehead and floated to the ground. He ground his teeth in failure. He looked down at the leaf, his usual determination shining in his eyes as he picked up the leaf and continued trying to perfecting his self-made control technique. Each time he failed, he grew increasingly frustrated with the technique. As the failures compounded upon each other, he finally reached a point where his frustration clashed with his control so bad that when he put the leaf on his head, it simply was blown away by the amount of chakra he used. He huffed and crossed his arms as he decided to take a break. Sakura and Sasuke, meanwhile, were simply standing on the bridge wondering what the hell Naruto was trying to do with that leaf. Sakura thought it was funny to see him unable to complete such a weak exercise. She knew he had large reserves, but she could complete this exercise almost instantly when it was introduced. She simply ignored his attempts and stared at Sasuke. Sasuke kept his eyes closed for the majority of the time that they waited for their sensei. But he opened his eyes once to see his teammates. He held back a snort of derision as he saw Sakura staring at him. He shivered as he saw her eyes were almost in the shapes of stars. But he turned to the only person he considered decent on his team. Oh, he was not dumb. Naruto was actually quite smart. He knew that Naruto was almost invincible if he was brought to a blow of the minds. Naruto's in-combat strategies caught even him by surprise, and that was hard as he was taught to expect attacks. As hard as it may be to admit, Naruto's unpredictability was probably the best ninja weapon ever invented, as a single wrong move by the enemy and Naruto's mind would have them eating dirt. No, Naruto may be naive, but he was far from dumb. As such, when he saw Naruto playing around with the leaf, his eyes narrowed as he tried to figure out what he was doing. After staring at Naruto for a good 20 minutes, he could only see that Naruto was constantly using too much chakra for this control technique. He scoffed and turned away, closing his eyes again. Naruto may be incredible under pressure, but when he was out of combat he was way too naive to be of any use. With this decided, Sasuke ignored what Naruto was doing, as his unpredictability led to his greatest weakness and strength. As smart as Naruto could be in battle, was as dumb as he would be out of battle. Sasuke ignored Naruto's curse and thought to himself, it's only Naruto. None of the genin noticed Kakashi staring at them from across a few buildings. He narrowed his eyes at Naruto but sighed in disappointment as his plan of making them work together while he was late wasn't working. He rubbed the back of his head. What would you do, Minato-sensei? He asked his sensei as he looked at the man's head on the mountain. Receiving no answer, he sighed before shining onto the bridge and greeting his team. Yo, he said as he appeared next to a frustrated-looking Naruto. You're late. A screech came from Sakura. Kakashi cast a quick glance at Naruto, worried that something might be annoying him beyond the training since he hadn't bothered to yell at him as usual, but when he saw him staring intently at a leaf he shrugged it off. When Naruto was focused on something it was almost impossible to dissuade him from it. Well, you see, there was this old lady that needed, Kakashi began. Save it. Are we going on a mission today or not? Sasuke said as he glared at his eternally tardy sensei. Kakashi smiled from under his face mask. Well, since my cute little genin saw fit to annoy me, I think we can skip a mission today and simply do teamwork exercises to make up for it. Meet me at the training grounds in 5 minutes, he said before poofing away. Sasuke and Sakura looked torn between being happy that they didn't have to do a D-rank mission, and sad that it was teamwork exercises again. Naruto simply looked up as Kakashi poofed away and almost started to panic. What happened? Where'd Kakashi-sensei go? He asked. Sakura sighed as she said, Naruto baka, weren't you listening? Her voice finally reaching a screech, he said to meet him at the training grounds. Naruto looked at her and smiled, thanks Sakura-chan. He said before turning around and heading to the training grounds as Sasuke had already taken the lead. Sakura simply sighed before following her teammates. Naruto lowered his head as he walked in between his two teammates. He saw how they interacted with the public. Sakura was greeted by a few people and she responded kindly as they walked to their training. She seemed to know a few of the important civilian shops and businesses that they came across on their short little trek. Sasuke was almost being bowed to as the trio walked by. He was his usual stuck-up self, but Naruto could now pick out the subtle nuances that showed Sasuke liked the attention he was given by the civilians. Being the poster child for pain must have been great. Naruto's hands balled into fists as he saw the glares that his presence brought. He was starting to grow tired of the blatant hatred that people seemed to associate with him. He couldn't even walk down the street without being glared at by one person. He sighed and placed a huge smile on his face as the trio continued their journey. He waved and smiled at people who did nothing more than glare back at him. His eyes held mirth and happiness to many, but to one who cared to look close enough, they held a loneliness so profound it would bring others to their knees even as he walked along in the presence of his own two teammates. Naruto and his team walked into their training grounds to see their sensei sitting on the same log he had tied Naruto to in their bell test. They each walked closer and Naruto smiled at his sensei as he shouted, "Good morning, Kakashi-sensei." Kakashi chuckled as he returned the smile with his own and said, "Ohio Naruto." Naruto's eyes squinted as his smile widened. So, are we going to learn some jutsu finally? He asked excitedly. Kakashi's smile didn't waver as he responded, "Nope," he replied cheerfully. Naruto's smile disappeared and he frowned but was soon back to smiling as he continued bouncing on his toes in anticipation. Though he didn't like only doing teamwork exercises, they were supposed to help him get better, so he tried to focus on them. Kakashi looked at his other two students and had to hold back a frown as they just glared at him or brooded about how teammates did nothing but weaken you. He sighed as he clapped his hands together and began to explain their teamwork exercise. "Alright, all three of you get in a triangle," he said. The three genin shrugged and set themselves so that, if you were to look at them from a bird's eye view, it would seem they were each one tip of a triangle. Kakashi nodded and pulled something out of his pocket. He flicked his hand forward, throwing something at Naruto as he yelled, "Catch!" Naruto's hand shot out and grasped the small white object flying through the air. What gives Kakashi-sensei? Naruto shouted as he looked at the object in his hand. He noticed it was an egg. He was surprised he hadn't crushed it when he caught it. The now revealed egg was the whole point of this exercise, but Naruto simply his head to the side, confused. Why did you give me an egg, Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked, so Sakura and Sasuke both now knew what had been thrown. Kakashi smiled under his face mask. I have decided to try a new teamwork exercise, he stated as if it were obvious. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura all sweat dropped as they looked at their teacher. Kakashi-sensei, how does an egg help our teamwork? Sakura asked. Kakashi's eye closed as he said, I am glad you asked. What you are going to do is take that egg, he pointed to the egg in Naruto's hands, and toss it to one of your teammates. He indicated Sasuke or Sakura with a wave of his hand. The trick is, you must not break the egg when throwing it to your teammate. This requires you to know, not only your own limitations but your teammates as well. We will continue this exercise until you can throw the egg around for an hour continuously before I deem you worthy of the next stage of this training, he explained. Kakashi-sensei, what are the other levels? Sakura asked hesitantly. Kakashi smiled eerily. Why then we get to move on to more dangerous things, like Senbon or Kunai, after we use easily popped air balls and a few other things I have concocted, he said with a cheery smile on his face. Well, get to work, he said before sitting back down and opening his porn again. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura all looked at each other for a few seconds before Naruto shrugged and turned his body so he was facing both of his teammates. He took a stance and lobbed the egg in Sasuke's direction. Sasuke watched the egg until it came within reach and his hands flew out to grab the egg. Once he did, however, it immediately splattered onto his hands in a mess of raw egg. Sasuke looked at his hand in disbelief before turning a scathing glare onto Naruto, who was grinning like a madman at his teammate's misfortune. Naruto baka, look what you did, Sakura screeched. Naruto immediately stopped grinning and turned to Sakura, but Sakura-chan, I didn't burst the egg in his hand, Sasuke-tem did that on his own. He shouted at her. You threw it too hard, Sakura accused. Naruto pouted as he turned away from Sasuke. He should have caught it softer then, he retorted. Kakashi sighed and produced another egg. This is the purpose of the exercise, so continue, he said as he threw the egg to Sasuke, who immediately hurled the egg in Naruto's direction. Naruto, being himself, suddenly reached out and managed to cradle the egg as it came close to him. He was about to bring the egg into his body when his hand suddenly crushed the egg as he caught it, leaving his hands much like Sasuke's. He stared at it in disbelief before turning and accusing Sasuke of exactly what Sakura had accused him of. Kakashi sighed as he saw a pattern. He pulled out a dozen eggs and threw one to Sakura and flared his killing intent, aka Ki, getting Sasuke's attention and Naruto's battle-ready stance as he looked at him. Kakashi's eye widened as he took in Naruto's stance. Naruto suddenly threw a hand behind his head as he realized who had flared some ki. Years of being glared at desensitized him to small amounts, but large amounts brought back memories of his days running from the occasional mob. He rubbed his head sheepishly as he smiled disarmingly to his sensei, who was the only one who saw him in a battle-ready stance as Sakura had been watching Sasuke. Gomen Kakashi-sensei, he said. Kakashi's eyes narrowed. What the hell? Why would he immediately jump into a battle stance when faced with Chunin-level ki? What the hell happened that I wasn't made aware of? He questioned. Finally, admitting you did it on purpose, Hadobi, Sasuke said with an arrogant smirk on his face as he took Naruto's apology as an admittance of guilt. Sakura stood a few yards away nodding her head. About time you admit you did it just to try and upshow Sasuke-kun, she said. Naruto's eyes turned to his teammates and opened his mouth to deny it when Kakashi spoke up to avoid a conflict. it's a good thing that Naruto did admit it, at least he is getting the point of the exercise. That he is supposed to start measuring his own strength and observing your own so as to accurately be able to fight at your side. Kakashi said, letting Naruto know that he knew what he was apologizing for by praising him but also getting his point about the exercise across to the whole team. Sasuke said as he turned around believing he was superior and didn't need teammates. Sakura looked down about being put down but she knew Kakashi was right. Okay. Let's continue, your turn Sakura, toss the egg to one of your teammates. Kakashi said as he smiled under his face mask at his team. This continued for the better part of the day until Kakashi decided it was the normal time for them to end their training. As Naruto threw the final egg at Sakura, Kakashi watched as it landed in Sakura's hands and waited for it to burst. When it didn't, he smiled as he said, "Good job, Naruto, Sakura, you managed to keep it from busting. I think that is enough for today." Naruto preened under his sensei's praise and Sakura smiled as she looked at Sasuke, expecting him to be happy. She was unprepared when Sasuke's usual dour expression seemed to sour even more as he took in Kakashi's words. "Well, we will continue this until I think it's time to change, meet on our bridge tomorrow at our regular time." "Ya nay," he said as he poofed inwardly away laughing at how much his genin stunk. Naruto smiled brightly as he heard Kakashi praise him. He looked over at Sakura and Sasuke, and was about to ask if the two wanted to accompany him for some ramen, but then he suddenly looked down at his clothes, Kurenai. He thought then, without a second look, he bounded out of the training grounds to take a quick cold shower before he met up with her. He didn't want to stink for when he went out with his first friend. Sasuke was slightly surprised when he saw Naruto suddenly dash away but his thoughts were interrupted when Sakura came up to him and he mentally scoffed, "Sasuke-kun would," she started. "No," he stated and turned around, following Naruto's path back to the city. Sakura looked down, she was a bit depressed that Sasuke would never go on a date with her. She turned and opened her mouth to speak. "No Naru," she said before she noticed she was standing alone in the training grounds with no Naruto standing there to ask her on a date, too. She finished as her mouth snapped shut. Good thing he finally decided that he would stop asking me on a date. She thought. Finally, we have Sasuke-kun all to ourselves. Shanaru. Inner Sakura said. Sakura nodded and began to walk to her home. She clenched her hand over her heart for a second before pawing off the phantom pain that had stopped her heart as she thought of Naruto again and headed home. Naruto bounded across the rooftops heading to his apartment. The smile on his face was an unusual sight. Many times when the Anbu would see Naruto jumping around like that, it was because he had managed to accomplish a prank. But this smile was different. It shone in the light as a picture of his happiness instead of his mischief. Many of the Anbu smiled under their masks, they didn't hate the kid. His pranks livened up their lives and kept their usual bleak and dull day fun and entertaining. As much as they may not like it when they were the objective of the pranks, they could respect his skill in stealth and the ingenuity it took for him to accomplish them. As a whole, the Anbu were particularly fond of the blonde Jinchuriki. Not that Naruto knew that. Naruto paid no heed to the Anbu he spotted and ran into his apartment. He stripped down as fast as possible and jumped into his shower with freezing cold water. He quickly rubbed himself down with soap and scrubbed his hands furiously to get the raw egg off of them. Once he had finished, Naruto jumped out of the shower and pulled the other orange jumpsuit he had out of his drawer and put it on. After that, he grabbed his kunai pouch and strapped it on before running to his door, slipping his shoes on, and rushing back out to meet with his friend. Naruto came to a stop in Training Ground 7. He looked over at the memorial stone, giving a respectful bow of his head, he began extending his senses trying to see if anyone was following. He stood there for close to 2 minutes making sure that he didn't have anyone there. As impatient as he was, He didn't want anyone else finding his little sanctuary. Once he was satisfied he didn't have anyone watching him, he glanced around before creeping into the underbrush and setting off for the waterfall where he was supposed to meet Kurenai. It took him a little while, but after managing to sneak into the woods he crept around to make sure no one could see him before stepping up his pace and running through the underbrush. Completely forgetting yesterday's incident, Naruto burst onto the banks of the river shouting, "Gomen Kurenai-san, I didn't mean to be late." Naruto froze as he took in the sight in front of him. But it was for but a mere second before he twirled on his toes and did a complete circle facing away from the waterfall. His face was a neon red as he said, "Gomen Kurenai-san, from now on, I will yell before coming into the clearing," he said as he trembled from the sight burned into his eyes. Behind him, Kurenai smiled at him, she was completely standing near her clothes again. She had just finished a shower before he showed up. She had frozen when he suddenly burst into the clearing, but when he didn't stare at her and instead turned back around, she was proud of him. She knew many men would just stare and then apologize, especially with her as their object of affections. Instead, he immediately turned around and didn't even try to take a second look. She chuckled as she took in his trembling form. She grabbed her dressings and dressed before walking up behind him and laying a hand on his shoulder. She turned him around and gave him a small smile. "Thank you for not staring, Naruto-san, and I don't think you need to yell, simply try to announce your presence before coming in here and I will do the same," she said. Naruto smiled up at her hesitantly. "You're not mad?" he asked. Kurenai shook her head. "I may not like it, but you proved that it was an accident by turning around immediately. I appreciate that more than you know, Naruto-san," she said, still with a small smile. For a second, she wondered who might have taught him how to be such a gentleman. But she brushed it off. "Now I believe it is time to go get you some clothes," she said. Naruto looked down but turned back to her with Gamma-chan in his hands. Kurenai-san, I know this isn't much, but this should help cover some of the costs," he said as he offered her the overflowing wallet. Kurenai's eyes widened in shock at his wallet. What the hell? With the amount sitting in there, he should have no trouble buying new clothes. Why did he say that the only thing he could afford was that hideous jumpsuit? She thought to herself. Then her eyes narrowed. "Naruto-san, how much did you pay for those jumpsuits?" she asked. Naruto smiled brightly. "About this much for one of them," he responded. "It was such a lucky deal, even one shirt cost like 3 times this much. But with this, I got a full set of clothes for less than one article," he said with a huge smile. Kurenai frowned. I can't believe that they would try to price gouge him so badly. Well, that stops now. I am introducing him to Takeshi's shop, she thought. She hadn't want to take him to the highest shop in town, but she was sure Takeshi wouldn't see him badly. Naruto shrunk back from Kurenai as ki started coming off her in waves. He knew she was angry, but he didn't know why. He simply looked at her with some trepidation as he pulled Gamma-chan back to his chest. He worried that he might have offended her with offering to pay after she had said she would, but he couldn't let her pay for all of his stuff. He took a few steps back and was about to speak when Kurenai suddenly looked down at him. He froze at the cold fury shining within her ruby-red eyes. He felt his heart skip a beat as he stared into her almost murderous gaze. His eyes finally showing the fear he had from what she was doing as he began to back up slowly. Suddenly, the ki abated and her ruby-red eyes shone with a compassion he had never seen except in his Gigi's eyes. She reached out tentatively, making her actions deliberate as she held her hand out to him and said, "Gomen Naruto-san, I didn't mean to be so angry, but you shouldn't have been paying so much for your clothes." Naruto's eyes widened. "I see you know why, so I want to introduce you to a shop that won't try to overcharge you. With the money you have there," she pointed to his Gamma-chan, "you should be able to buy almost 8 different sets of clothes," she said. Naruto looked down. sad that he had been spending his money so horribly. But he looked back up with determination in his eyes as he nodded and smiled at Kurenai, who smiled back at him. Arigato Kurenai-san, he said. Kurenai merely waved him off. It's what friends are for, aren't they, Naruto-san? She said as she smiled at him. Naruto smiled happily before suddenly jumping at her and wrapping his hands around her stomach. He rubbed his head of shiny blonde locks into her as his eyes leaked tears. Arigato, arigato, he continued repeating as he hugged her tight. Kurenai herself blushed as he rubbed his head into her. She was about to knock him away when she noticed what it was he was doing. She smiled sadly down at him and wrapped her own arms around his shoulders as she allowed him to hug her despite his position. I hope Anko isn't anywhere around. She would get such a kick out of this, she thought to herself. Naruto suddenly jumped away and blushed furiously as he looked at her. Gomen Kurenai-san, I lost control of myself again, he said. Kurenai giggled, and again had to slap herself inside her head as she looked at him. He looked so contrite that it was funny. It's okay, Naruto-san. Let's go get you some clothes, nay, she said. Naruto nodded happily. He turned to leave. Naruto-san, what say we travel by Shunshin? Kurenai offered as she held her hand out to him. Naruto looked at her hand and smiled as he stepped back and took her hand. She smiled as the two disappeared into a swirl of leaves. Naruto and Kurenai appeared in front of a nice-looking shop. Naruto looked around and noticed that he could see the main hub of the city a few blocks up. The shops around here would usually be way too expensive for him to buy anything, so he hadn't been down here in years. He sighed as he noticed that everyone started to glare at him as soon as he appeared, even next to Kurenai. He looked up in front of himself and noticed a shop with the name, Dragon's Claw, painted above the shop's windows in bright gold letters. On display in the shop windows were weapons and battle armors of all kinds. Naruto looked up at Kurenai and she smiled down at him as she stepped forward and proceeded into the shop. Naruto hesitated but a moment before following her into it himself. Once he entered, he was almost overwhelmed at the huge amount of stock sitting on the shelves. The store was filled to overflowing with different types of swords, staffs, short swords, and even clubs. His eyes didn't really land on anything in particular. Everything seemed perfect to him. So, once he observed the whole store, he turned his attention back to Kurenai, but he noticed her eyes were lingering on a particular weapon on display. He followed her eyesight to an impressive-looking short sword. The blade sat on display with the sheath lying underneath it. The blade itself was double-edged and dark gray, perfect for concealing it during even a full moon. He wondered how it could have such a color as most weapons were a shiny silver. The tsuba was a normal square but it had intricate designs that one could see if you looked hard enough. The handle was wrapped in a red cloth with a wooden base. A red tassel fell from the end of the handle giving it a regal-looking appearance. The sheath itself was almost as magnificent as the blade to behold. The tip of the sheath had a black guard on it. The sheath itself was blood red to match the hilt of the blade. The only blemish on the whole red sheath was a single kanji resting in the middle of the sheath in black. Naruto's eyes honed in on the kanji and he spoke softly, "Silencer." That was the name of the blade. He followed the sheath up to where the sword was to be put and noticed that the edge of the sheath was black just as the guard was. The thing Naruto noticed though, was the hilt and sheath were the same color red as Kurenai's eyes. All in all, an assassin's weapon. He and Kurenai were brought out of their observation of the weapon as a tall man with bulging muscles walked out of the room in the back of the store and his voice boomed out from where he stood. Kurenai-chan, what brings you here today? He asked as he smiled at Kurenai. Kurenai smiled back at him. Takeshi-san. How are you? She asked. I'm fine, but you aren't due for more resources just yet. What I sold you last time should have held you over for quite a while, especially with your genin team, he responded. Naruto watched as the two conversed and he wondered exactly how Kurenai knew this person. He wanted to jump up and introduce himself, but he didn't want to offend Kurenai by embarrassing her in front of an apparent friend. So, he let his eye wander around the store as the two continued to talk, completely oblivious about him. Kurenai looked down at Naruto, drawing Takeshi's eyes to him as well as she answered him. I brought my new friend here to come shop for something a bit more ninja-like than this kill me orange, she said. Takeshi stepped forward and looked down at the minuscule Naruto. His eyes widened as he took in the blonde hair and whisker marks. He stared at Naruto as Naruto continued looking around the business, oblivious to the two stares being directed at him. But, as Naruto's eyes panned around, they eventually came to lock onto Takeshi's. The blonde took a slight step back from the huge man. However, right after that, Naruto began to stare at the huge man, matching the intensity of Takeshi's stare. Kurenai watched with a small breath as the stare-down continued. Naruto and Takeshi suddenly both broke out into grins. Naruto-san, the prankmaster from hell who managed to actually prank my store. Takeshi boomed out. Naruto's chest puffed out. I knew that the sign looked familiar. He shouted. Kurenai stared in shock as Takeshi reached out and held his hand out to Naruto. Naruto's minuscule hand was completely engulfed in the bare of a man's hand, but the two shook hands, which only further increased Kurenai's shock as Takeshi had never shaken another person's hand other than one person. Good job, my young friend. I must say I was impressed with your ability. Now what can I do for you today? He asked as they released hands. Naruto rubbed his head sheepishly as Kurenai snapped out of her shock and smiled slightly at Takeshi. Naruto-san seems to be having trouble paying for something other than that orange monstrosity as people tax him, she said, grounding out people. Takeshi looked down at Naruto with surprise before his face broke into a grin. Well, you are more than welcome to shop for whatever you need here, and I will even throw in a discount for a first-time shopper if you come back, Naruto-san. Kurenai's jaw almost unhinged as she heard that. Takeshi's shop was one of the best in the village, and for him to give a discount was unheard of. She looked down at Naruto with wide eyes. What the hell did he do to get this treatment? She wondered, only to remember Takeshi was known as one of the fairest people around and he probably knew of Naruto but couldn't help him until now. She shook her head as she asked Naruto, what size are you? Naruto looked up at her with wide eyes. I don't know, I never really looked. He said, I would just hold it up and take it, even if it was a bit big it didn't matter. Kurenai sighed and looked down at him, taking in how big he looked with the orange monstrosity. She decided she couldn't figure out his size with the jacket on. Take off your jacket, she said. Both Takeshi and Kurenai noticed how nervous he became when she said that. Why? He asked, stuttering as his body froze almost as if he was going to bolt out of the store. Takeshi, upon see his reaction, moved to the front door and turned his sign to closed before turning around. Take it off, Naruto-san, he said as he looked at him from in front of the door. Naruto looked down and his body shivered slightly. Kurenai was about to speak when he reached up and began to unzip his jacket. Both Kurenai and Takeshi had to raise an eyebrow as they saw he had a mesh shirt underneath his jacket. His chest was slightly muscled. You could see there was a small amount of muscle underneath the tanned skin, but there wasn't much fat, as would be expected by a child. That was where the normalcy ended. As Naruto's ribcage became visible, a key washed over the store as Takeshi's hands trembled, but Kurenai's eyes seemed almost aflame as she looked at his ribs, standing out as his skin clung to his frame. Naruto flinched slightly at the key but continued, showing how his stomach was sunken in, looking almost like there was nothing there. Takeshi could swear he almost saw his spine. Naruto finally pulled his jacket off and put it on the ground. Both of the adults were a bit mollified when his arms showed some decent muscles. Naruto curled into himself as he took in both of their murderous expressions. His shoulders started to shake as their ki didn't let up. He didn't know that their reaction would have been this bad. he was just hoping they didn't try to hurt him. He was hungry and slightly tired from standing almost all day trying to throw eggs to his teammates. Even though he was naturally hyperactive, he did have his own limits regarding how much he could do on an empty stomach. Takeshi's eyes were wide with anger as he didn't understand how Naruto could be so malnourished. He thought of his tendon like that and his ki almost seemed to double as he saw her despondent face instead of Naruto's. He was furious at this village. Kurenai was shocked at first but soon her eyes were aflame with justice. She was going to help him eat properly. No one deserved to be starving, especially not a ninja. Besides, if he couldn't eat healthy then he was almost finished as a ninja already. Her ki was barely being restrained as she felt Takeshi's wash over his shop. She managed to restrain herself as she didn't want to scare Naruto too badly. However, she finally noticed how he was shaking. She turned to Takeshi and made a motion to Naruto telling him to cut his ki. Once he did, she stepped closer to Naruto. She went to put her hand on him but he flinched away and looked at her with fearful eyes again. Her heart broke as a face of pain and loneliness was present on such a young person. I know my body isn't the best looking but please still be my friend, he said in a quiet, almost breaking tone. He stared into Kurenai's ruby orbs, his face reflecting all of the times he had felt alone. He felt Takeshi's gaze on him but he only had eyes for the raven-haired goddess in front of him, his first friend, even if it was for only a day. He didn't know what he would do if another person betrayed him like his Gigi had. He watched apprehensively as she bent down to his level. His heart almost soared as he heard her speak. Naruto-san, I don't care what you look like, I just was surprised, I am sorry. I didn't mean to frighten you. I am still your friend, she said. Another true smile split his face as he launched himself forward and hugged her tightly, almost suffocating her as he squeezed her head like a lifeline. She reached around him and hugged him as well. He blushed and stepped back a few seconds later. Arigato, he said. Takeshi stepped forward and bent down to Naruto. I would like for you to be my friend as well, Naruto-san. You have endured something no child should. As much as I wish to call you a child, I cannot. Young man, I would be honored to call you among my friends, he said with a small smile and his hand held out again. Naruto's smile almost blinded the two adults as he reached forward and grasped Takeshi's hand with all his might and shook it. Arigato Takeshi-san, he said. What do you eat, Naruto-san? Kurenai asked as he released Takeshi's hand. Naruto looked up at Kurenai and grinned slightly. Anything I can afford, usually ramen from Ichiraku Ramen as they are the only ones I can pay for. Sometimes they even give me free food, he said smiling, but when I run out of money, I can't eat so I sometimes just go a few days without eating until I receive my allowance from the Hokage Tower. He was ecstatic with his new friends so he ignored how worried they looked. How much do you get each week, Naruto? Takeshi asked curiously. Naruto pulled out Gama-chan, drawing a surprised look from Takeshi. About 10,000 ryu, he said as he pulled the bills to show that much. Takeshi and Kurenai's eyes narrowed. You can only afford ramen with this? Takeshi asked. Naruto nodded. Both the adults shared a look that Naruto missed as he was basking in the fact he now had two friends. Well, it looks like your tenant helps you out in multiple ways, Kurenai said, drawing surprised looks from Naruto and Takeshi. Without it, you would probably have a bulging belly but no muscles because of malnutrition, she explained. She was well versed in human physiology to be able to take people out for interrogation. Takeshi nodded as Naruto his head in confusion. What's malnutrit? Naruto stuttered. Malnutrition, Kurenai offered. Naruto nodded. It means you aren't eating correctly, Naruto-san. Kurenai said. Guess the damn fox is earning his rent. Naruto said quietly, drawing chuckles from Kurenai and Takeshi, but let's get some clothes. Can you guess my size now, Kurenai-san? He asked. Kurenai nodded. I will be right back, I already have an idea of what you would like, she said as she walked off into the store. Naruto looked around for a second before spotting the weapon Kurenai had wanted. His face split into a grin and he looked at the price. It was 250,000 ryu. His grin fell a bit but he turned to Takeshi. Takeshi-san, he asked tentatively so Kurenai couldn't hear him. Takeshi looked at him. Could you tell me how much it might cost me to get that? He said pointing at the sword. Takeshi's eyes widened as he took in the weapon. That has been sitting there for a while. I know Kurenai. Takeshi looked down at Naruto with a surprised look. You want to get it for her? He asked. Naruto blushed a bit but nodded. She's my first friend, she doesn't need to be doing this but I want to repay her. I saw she liked it so I wanted to get it for her. He said. Takeshi nodded. She has been looking at it for a while. Alright, I tell you what, I will sell it to you for 200,000 ryu. But I will let you make a payment plan, he said. Naruto his head to the side in a curious fashion. I know you won't have all the money just yet as you still need weapons I am sure. Naruto nodded. A payment plan just means I will take your money at set times for a set amount until you pay it all. Understand, he said. Naruto's eyes squinted but a moment later, Naruto nodded. Almost like rent but it is building to a certain amount. Naruto said drawing a surprised look again. How do you know about rent? Takeshi asked. I pay it for my apartment. How much for one payment? Naruto answered as Kurenai came back with some dark gray items in her hands. About 120,000 for a down payment and I will allow 10,000 ryu a month. Work for you Naruto-san? Takeshi asked drawing a surprised look from Kurenai. What could you be buying for that amount? She questioned but Naruto merely smiled mischievously before turning back to Takeshi. Perfect Takeshi-san. Arigato. He said. Go try these on Naruto-san. Kurenai said and shoved them into Naruto's hands. Naruto smiled and took off to the changing rooms. As Naruto changed, Kurenai tried to pry out what was so expensive from Takeshi, but he thoroughly denied her as he didn't want to ruin Naruto's surprise for her. Naruto walked back out and looked at Takeshi and Kurenai. Both of them smiled upon seeing his new clothes. He was wearing a dark gray shirt with the kanji for illusion on the back, oddly enough, and a small swirl on his front right. It hugged his body showing some of his ribs but flaring out around his stomach. This led to dark gray pants with burnt orange stripes down the side. He was wearing the usual blue shoes on his feet, but his headband was tied around his left arm leaving his bangs to hang into his eyes. He smiled at them and said, well. Both of them nodded at him. But he frowned. It's missing something, he said. His eyes panned around again as he tried to figure out what was missing. All of a sudden, his eyes landed on something hanging in the bargain bin. He smirked a foxy smirk as he walked forward and grabbed the item. He tied it around his waist, twice, before letting the excess hang down to his calf. He looked up and grinned at them. There. Kurenai put a hand to her chin as she contemplated what he had added. Takeshi, however, laughed. Perfect Naruto, he said. Kurenai took a few minutes more before she spoke. You are set on that? She asked. He nodded. She sighed but nodded her head with a small smile. I suppose you always need your own flair huh Naruto-san? She asked. Naruto grinned at her as he looked down at his new addition. A burnt orange sash that, if his observation was correct, would act much like Kurenai's single red sleeve, distracting the enemy. The great part about it, for Naruto, was that if someone tried to grab it, he could use it to move into close range. Takeshi grinned and said, okay, I can have a few more of those made and it will cost you about 20,000 ryu altogether. If you add in kunai and shuriken plus your down payment, then about 155,000 ryu, he counted in their purchases. Naruto nodded and smiled at Takeshi. He handed over the money. Takeshi grabbed the money and put it in his register. Takeshi turned around and grabbed silencer. He then put it in its sheath and said, This has seals in the guard to keep the blade eternally sharp and free of blood and rust. It is perfect for Genjutsu masters. He said. It is said, it even allows you access to an opponent's mindscape. He explained, drawing a slight gasp from Kurenai. And now it is yours, Kurenai. Thank your little friend there. He said as he turned around and presented the sheathed blade to her. She reached out and grasped the blade, cradling it almost lovingly as she looked at what she had wanted for a while but couldn't justify spending the money on it. She looked down at Naruto and frowned at him as she didn't really want him to spend his hard-saved money on her. You don't have to buy this for me, she said. Naruto shook his head. You didn't have to help me. I want you to have it. Arigato, Kurenai-san. He said as he smiled at her. Kurenai shook her head and said, Arigato, Naruto-san, she said. Naruto noticed it was getting dark outside and said, let me walk you home again. I think we should call it a day today, he said. Takeshi grinned and leaned down to whisper to Naruto. Again, Naruto, don't you think it's a bit fast for you to be dating Kurenai? He asked, grinning. Naruto blushed bright red, drawing Kurenai's attention, but he turned to Takeshi. I am just friends with her. Takeshi baka, he shouted and proceeded out of the shop with a bright red face. Kurenai looked at Takeshi, but he simply whistled, feigning innocence as Naruto walked away. She narrowed her eyes before sighing and deciding she didn't want to know. She tied her new weapon onto her back and followed Naruto out of the store. The walk to Kurenai's apartment was spent in companionable silence. When they were outside the complex, Naruto turned to Kurenai and smiled again. Arigato again, Kurenai-san, he said. Kurenai smiled at him. No arigato to you, Naruto. I always wanted that weapon, but I couldn't justify spending the money on it, she said as he looked at her blade again. He looked down and blushed before saying, it matches your eyes, Kurenai-san. He rushed through it. Kurenai almost missed it, before he shouted at her, bye Kurenai-san, see you around, he said as he suddenly turned and ran off. Kurenai smiled at him as he ran away, a bit amused at how shy he was being. She smiled a bit wider as she walked into her apartment. Naruto could definitely be unpredictable. Naruto's smile couldn't be beat as he walked down the streets with his new clothes on and replacements in his hands. He grinned widely as he began to run to his apartment. I can't believe I got another friend, he shouted in his head as he dashed up his stairs and through his door. He threw his new clothes on his couch before running into his room. He threw himself onto his bed and sighed happily as he thought of today. Today was perfect, he thought.